Let the world grow quiet now. Let the day's worries settle like dust in a still room. You are safe, and you are comfortable, and the hour is late enough that the sharp edges of the world have softened. Perhaps you are lying down. Perhaps the blankets are pulled up to your chin. Perhaps the only light comes from a dim lamp or the glow of a screen that will soon be set aside. However you have come to this moment, you are welcome here. Tonight, we are going to travel back in time, not through loud alarms or flashing headlines, but gently the way one drifts into a dream. We are going to walk the muddy streets of a young nation, stand on the banks of a great river, and overhear whispers of a deal that would change everything. It is a story of maps and money, of presidents and emperors, of soil and water and sky. It is the story of the Louisiana Purchase, the deal that doubled America. And like all the best stories, it begins not with a bang but with a slow, patient murmur. Imagine the year 1803. The United States of America is still a baby, really, a child of barely 27 years. It is a strip of land hugging the Atlantic coast, from the rocky shores of Maine down to the warm harbors of Georgia. Beyond the Appalachian Mountains lies a vast wilderness, a stretch of forests and rivers and rolling plains that the young nation is only beginning to explore. To the west, beyond the Mississippi River, lies a territory so enormous that its boundaries are not even fully known. It is called Louisiana, and it belongs not to the United States but to France, or rather, it will soon belong to France again. For at this very moment, a secret deal is being signed in Europe, shifting ownership of this immense land from one old empire to another. But let us slow down. Let us not rush ahead. Let us instead step carefully into the world of 1803 and feel what it was like to be alive then. The air is different. It smells of wood smoke and damp earth, of horse sweat and candle wax. At night, the sky is thick with stars, unspoiled by electric light. The roads are rutted tracks of mud and dust. News travels at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship, which means that a message from Washington to New Orleans might take weeks. In this slow, deliberate world, the fate of a continent can be decided by a handful of men sitting in quiet rooms, speaking in measured tones. The man at the center of our story is Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States. He is tall and thin, with reddish hair that is beginning to gray, and a face that seems always on the verge of a thoughtful smile. He is a man of many contradictions, a slave owner who wrote that all men are created equal, a scholar who loved books and science, a politician who distrusted cities and banks. He is also a man who dreams of an empire of liberty, a vast republic of independent farmers stretching across the continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But in 1803, that dream is still fragile, still uncertain. The nation he leads is small and weak, surrounded by the territories of powerful European empires. To the north, the British hold Canada. To the south and west, the Spanish claim Florida and Texas and California. And in the middle, like a key, lies the Mississippi River, the great watery highway that carries the produce of the American frontier down to the port of New Orleans. New Orleans. Even the name sounds exotic, a little drowsy, like a secret whispered in the heat of the afternoon. In 1803, New Orleans is a small but bustling city, a mix of French, Spanish, African, and Native American cultures. Its streets are narrow and crooked, lined with wooden houses and open sewers. The air is thick with the smell of coffee and tobacco, and the river itself, that wide, muddy, powerful stream that flows past the city on its way to the Gulf of Mexico. For American farmers living in the Ohio River Valley, in Kentucky and Tennessee, and the Mississippi Territory, New Orleans is everything. It is the gateway to the world. They load their corn and wheat, their pork and tobacco, onto flatboats and float them down the river to New Orleans, where the goods are loaded onto ocean-going ships and sold in Europe and the Caribbean. Without the right to use the port of New Orleans, the American frontier economy would collapse. And in 1803, that right is in danger. For years, the Spanish had controlled Louisiana, and they had been easygoing landlords. They allowed the Americans to use the port freely, to store their goods in warehouses, to trade without too much interference. But then, in a secret treaty signed in the year 1800, Spain agreed to give Louisiana back to France. The man behind this deal is Napoleon Bonaparte, the great French general and emperor, a man of immense ambition and restless energy. Napoleon dreams of a new French empire in North America, a vast colony centered on the Mississippi Valley and the sugar-rich island of Haiti. He wants to use Louisiana as a breadbasket to feed his Caribbean colonies and as a barrier to American expansion. When Thomas Jefferson hears of this secret transfer, he is alarmed. He knows Napoleon. He knows that Napoleon is not the easygoing landlord that Spain was. He knows that a French army may soon arrive in New Orleans and that the port may be closed to American trade. And so, in the early months of 1803, a sense of unease settles over the young nation. Jefferson writes letters, full of careful, measured words, expressing his concern. He sends a trusted friend, James Monroe, to Paris to help the American minister, Robert Livingston, negotiate the purchase of New Orleans and perhaps some of the surrounding land. Jefferson is willing to pay up to $10 million for just the city and its harbor. That is a lot of money for a small port city, but Jefferson knows that the future of the nation depends on it. He also knows that if he cannot buy New Orleans, he may have to go to war with France or form an alliance with Britain or do something drastic. The situation is delicate, like a glass held over a stone floor. But let us pause here for a moment. Let us feel the weight of this uncertainty. Imagine you are an American farmer in the year 1803, living in a cabin on the banks of the Ohio River. You have cleared the land with your own hands, planted your crops, raised your family. You depend on the river to carry your harvest to market, to bring you the goods you cannot make yourself, to connect you to the wider world. And now, You hear that a foreign emperor may close the river to you, may trap your goods, may cut you off from trade. You feel a quiet anger, a sense of injustice. You did not fight the revolution and build a new nation just to be strangled by a French general, but you also feel helpless. What can one farmer do against an empire? This is the mood that hangs over the country in the spring of 1803. In Washington, Jefferson waits for news from Paris, but the news takes weeks to arrive. In Paris, Livingston and Monroe negotiate with the French foreign minister, Talleyrand, a shrewd and cynical diplomat with a limp and a taste for intrigue. Talleyrand is not easy to deal with. He is evasive, non-committal, always hinting at possibilities he never quite states. Livingston grows frustrated. Monroe arrives, but the negotiations stall. The Americans do not know that Napoleon is having second thoughts about his North American empire. The French army sent to suppress a slave revolt in Haiti has been decimated by yellow fever and fierce resistance. Napoleon needs money for his wars in Europe. He is beginning to realize that Louisiana may be more of a liability than an asset. And then, one day in April, everything changes. The French offer to sell not just New Orleans, but the entire Louisiana territory, all of it, from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. The price is $15 million, about 3 cents an acre. Livingston and Monroe are stunned. They do not have the authority to make such a purchase. They do not know if Jefferson will approve. They do not know if the Constitution even allows the federal government to acquire new territory. But they also know that this is an opportunity that may never come again. They decide to accept the offer, and on April 30th, 1803, the Louisiana Purchase Treaty is signed. The news reaches Washington on July 3rd, 1803, and it spreads through the city like a slow, warm wave. Jefferson is overjoyed but also cautious. He knows that the purchase is controversial. Some Federalists oppose it, arguing that it is unconstitutional, that it will dilute the power of the original states, that it is a waste of money for a wilderness of unknown extent. But Jefferson believes that the future of the Republic depends on westward expansion. He believes that the land will provide space for millions of free farmers, that it will ensure the survival of the American experiment. And so, he submits the treaty to the Senate, which ratifies it in October 1803 by a vote of 24-7. And then on December 20th, 1803, in the city of New Orleans, a ceremony takes place. The French flag is lowered and the American flag is raised. The crowd watches in silence, or perhaps with a few cheers. The Spanish and French officials hand over the keys to the city. The Louisiana Territory passes from France to the United States. It is a quiet transfer, almost sleepy in its formality. No battles are fought. No blood is spilled. Just a few men in uniform walking across a parade ground, exchanging papers and salutes. And with that simple act, the United States doubles in size, adding about 828,000 square miles of land, from the bayous of Louisiana to the high plains of the Dakotas, from the forests of Minnesota to the deserts of New Mexico. But the story does not end there. The Louisiana Purchase is not just a deal on a piece of paper. It is a door opening onto an unknown continent. It is a question mark that will take generations to answer. What lies beyond the Mississippi? What strange animals and plants and peoples inhabit that vast expanse? How will the land be divided and settled? What will happen to the Native American nations who have lived there for thousands of years? These are questions that will occupy the nation for decades, that will lead to exploration and conflict, to hope and tragedy, to the growth of a continental empire. And so, as we drift deeper into the quiet of this night, let us follow the first steps of that exploration. Let us imagine a small group of men, led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, setting out from St. Louis in the spring of 1804, paddling up the Missouri River in a keelboat, their supplies packed in barrels, their journals ready to be filled. They do not know what they will find. They do not know if they will survive. They are heading into the unknown, carrying the hopes of a president and the curiosity of a nation. The river is wide and slow, brown with silt. The banks are thick with willows and cottonwoods. The air is warm. The mosquitoes are thick. And the journey has just begun. For now, let us rest here on the banks of the Missouri under the wide open sky of the Louisiana Territory. The stars are bright, and the river is murmuring a soft, ancient song. The campfire crackles. The smell of coffee and bacon drifts through the air. Men are writing in their journals, sharpening their pencils. The night is calm, and the future is a vast, dark, and beautiful mystery. And we are here in this quiet moment, watching it all unfold. A story as wide as the continent itself, told in the softest of voices for the sleepiest of listeners. And so we linger here for a while on the banks of the Missouri, listening to the water and the crackle of the fire. The men of the Corps of Discovery are settling in for the night. Some are mending their clothes, others are cleaning their rifles. One of them, a young man named George Drouillard, is carefully carving a new paddle from a piece of ash. He is part Shawnee, an expert hunter and tracker, and his movements are quiet and deliberate. Another man, Sergeant John Ordway, is writing in his journal by the light of a small lantern. He writes about the day's events, the distance covered, the wildlife spotted. He writes about the taste of the water, the color of the sky, the mood of the men. His handwriting is neat and steady like a slow, patient river. You can almost hear the scratch of his pen against the paper, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional laugh. The men are tired, but they are also hopeful. They are on an adventure, the greatest adventure of their lives, and they know it. They are heading into a land that no American has ever seen, a land that has only been described in the vague reports of French fur traders and the stories of Native American hunters. They carry with them maps that are mostly blank, filled with empty spaces and question marks. They have been told to find a water route to the Pacific Ocean, to study the plants and animals, to make contact with the tribes they encounter. They have been given gifts, beads, mirrors, knives, and cloth, to trade and to show friendship. But the journey is not just about science or diplomacy. It is about the sheer act of moving through a vast, wild landscape. It is about the rhythm of the paddle, the weight of the pack, the endless sky above and the muddy earth below. It is about the small moments, like the taste of a ripe plum found along the riverbank, or the sight of a herd of buffalo moving across the plains like a dark, slow river of fur and dust. It is about the feeling of the sun on your face in the morning, and the chill of the night air as you huddle around the fire. The days blur together. The Missouri River winds its way through the heart of the continent, sometimes wide and lazy, sometimes narrow and swift. The men row and paddle and tow the boats through the current. They pass through forests of oak and hickory, then across prairies of tall grass that wave in the wind like the surface of a green sea. They see animals they have never seen before: antelope, prairie dogs, coyotes, and the huge, shaggy bison. They see birds with bright feathers and strange calls. They see the sky turn purple and orange at sunset, and the stars come out one by one, so many that the Milky Way looks like a path of powdered sugar spilled across the heavens. And they meet people. At first, they encounter small groups of hunters and traders, men who speak French and English and various tribal languages. These encounters are brief and friendly, exchanges of news and goods. But as they move deeper into the territory, they meet larger villages of Mandan and Hidatsa, people who live in earth lodges along the river, farming corn and squash and beans. Lewis and Clark spend the winter of 1804 near these villages, building a sturdy fort they call Fort Mandan. The fort is a place of shelter and preparation. They hunt and trade, they mend their clothes and repair their equipment. They hold councils with the tribal leaders, presenting gifts and delivering speeches from President Jefferson, speeches that talk about peace and trade and the Great Father in Washington. The Mandan are curious and generous. They share their food, their stories, their knowledge of the land. They tell the explorers about the great river to the west, the Yellowstone, and about the mountains that are like a wall. They warn them about the fierce tribes beyond, the Sioux and the Blackfeet. They also introduce them to a young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea, who was captured by the Hidatsa years ago, and is now married to a French-Canadian trader named Toussaint Charbonneau. Sacagawea is pregnant, but she agrees to accompany the expedition as an interpreter and a guide. She carries her baby, Jean-Baptiste, on her back. Her presence is a sign of peace. A group of men with a woman and a child does not look like a war party. The winter at Fort Mandan is long and cold. The snow piles up around the fort and the Missouri freezes solid. The men stay inside, playing games, telling stories, mending their gear. Lewis writes in his journal about the plants and animals he has collected, and he organizes the specimens to be sent back to Jefferson. Clark makes careful maps, drawing the river as it bends and twists. They wait for spring, for the ice to break, for the river to open again. And when spring comes, it comes with a rush. The ice cracks and groans, and the water flows free. The men load their boats and say goodbye to the Mandan. They set out again, heading west into the unknown. The river is higher now, faster. The banks are lined with thickets of willow and rose. The mosquitoes are terrible, swarming around the men's faces and necks. They smear themselves with grease and bear fat to keep the insects away, but it only helps a little. They travel through the heart of the plains, past vast herds of buffalo and elk, past the camps of the Assiniboine and the Crow. They see strange rock formations, towering cliffs of sandstone and shale, carved by wind and water into shapes like castles and cathedrals. And then they reach the mountains. The Rockies rise up before them, a wall of stone that seems to touch the sky. The river becomes shallow and rocky, impossible to navigate. They have to abandon their boats and continue on foot, carrying their supplies on their backs. The land is steep and rugged, covered in pine and spruce and snow. The air is thin. The men gasp for breath, their legs ache. They are tired and hungry and cold, but they keep moving. They are guided by Sacagawea, who remembers the passes from her childhood. She leads them through narrow valleys and over high ridges. She shows them where to find roots and berries where the game is plentiful. She recognizes landmarks, a rock formation, a bend in a stream. Without her, the expedition might have wandered for weeks, lost in the vast wilderness. In August of 1805, at a place called Lemhi Pass, Lewis and Clark look out from the crest of the Rocky Mountains and see the other side. They see a distant range of mountains, and beyond that, the plains that lead to the Pacific. They are the first Americans to cross the continental divide. They stand there for a moment, breathing the thin, dry air, looking out at the land that will one day be the Oregon country. The view is overwhelming, so much space, so much silence. They descend the western slopes following the Clearwater River. They meet the Nez Perce, a people who are friendly and helpful. They trade for horses and canoes. They travel down the Snake River and then the Columbia, through deep gorges and past thundering waterfalls. The river is wild, full of rapids and whitewater. They portage around the worst places, carrying their canoes over rocks and slick trails. The men are exhausted, but they push on. And then, on November 7th, 1805, Clark writes in his journal, "Great joy in camp. We are in view of the ocean, this great Pacific Océan which we have been so long anxious to see. The ocean is gray and vast, stretching out to the horizon. The waves crash against the shore. The wind is cold and salty. They have made it. They have crossed the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific, a journey of more than 4,000 miles. They build a small fort, Fort Clatsop, near the mouth of the Columbia. They spend the winter there in the rain and the damp. The Oregon coast is wet and foggy. The men are often sick, coughing and shivering. The food is scarce. They hunt elk and trade with the local tribes, the Clatsop and the Chinook. They make new clothes from deer hides and trade for sea otter skins. They wait for spring for the return journey. But the return journey is not easy either. They paddle back up the Columbia, fighting the current. They cross the mountains again, this time in the snow. They find the Nez Perce again, who have cared for their horses. They ride and walk across the plains, past the familiar landmarks, the herds of buffalo, the villages of the Mandan. By the time they reach St. Louis in September of 1806. They have been gone for more than 2 years. They are tired and thin and ragged. Their clothes are in tatters, but they are alive. The news of their return spreads quickly. Jefferson is thrilled. The maps and journals are published. The people of the United States begin to understand the immense size and variety of the Louisiana Territory. They see drawings of the strange animals, the pronghorn antelope, the grizzly bear, the prairie dog. They read about the towering mountains and the endless plains. They learn about the many nations of Native Americans who live there. And they begin to dream about the future, about the land they might one day settle, the farms and towns and cities they might build. But the Louisiana Purchase is not just a story of exploration and adventure. It is also a story of displacement and loss. The land that Jefferson called an empire of liberty was already home to hundreds of thousands of people, people who had lived there for generations. The Purchase did not ask their permission. It did not recognize their ownership. The treaties and the maps and the flags were drawn by men in Washington and Paris, far away from the rivers and the plains. The Native American nations would soon face a wave of settlers, of soldiers, of forced removals. The story of the Louisiana Territory is a story of both hope and heartbreak, of dreams and of dust. And yet on this quiet night, we are not thinking about the wars and the treaties and the broken promises. We are thinking about the river, the sky, the stars. We are thinking about the men and women who made that first journey, who saw the continent before it was divided into states and counties. We are thinking about the vast, empty spaces that still exist, the places where the only sound is the wind and the cry of a hawk. The Louisiana Purchase was a deal, a piece of paper, a transfer of power. But it was also a door that opened onto an infinite horizon, a horizon that still stretches out before us, even now in our dreams. So let us drift, gentle listener. Let us drift down that river, past the cottonwoods and the willows, past the sleeping villages and the grazing herds. Let us feel the cool night air on our skin and hear the soft, steady rhythm of water against the hull. The stars are bright above the wide Missouri, and the moon is a silver coin in the black velvet of the sky. The journey is long, but there is no hurry. We are here in this moment in this story, and the night is deep and wide and full of peace. And so we drift, gentle listener, on that wide Missouri, under a sky that has seen so much. The expedition is over, but the story of the Louisiana Purchase has only just begun. The maps that Lewis and Clark brought back are careful and detailed, but they are also filled with blank spaces, places where the men did not go, rivers they did not follow, mountains they only glimpsed from afar. For years after their return, those blank spaces are whispered about in trading posts and frontier settlements. There are stories of a great river that flows west, of a lake of salt that never freezes, of a mountain made of pure crystal. Some of these stories are true, many are not, but they all share the same longing, the same quiet hunger to know what lies beyond the next ridge. The Louisiana Territory is vast. It is so vast that even today, driving across it in a car, you can feel the emptiness pressing in on you. The sky is big, the land is flat, and the horizon seems to stretch forever. But in the years after the purchase, it is not empty at all. It is full of people, of villages, of hunting grounds and burial sites. The Osage live in the southern plains. The Sioux roam the northern prairies. The Arikara and the Mandan farm along the Missouri. They have their own stories, their own names for the rivers and the hills. The purchase does not change that, not right away. For most of them, the news of the deal is as distant as a cloud on the horizon. They do not see the flags change. They do not hear the speeches from Washington. They simply go on living as they have for generations, following the buffalo, planting the corn, telling the old stories around the fire at night. But change is coming, slowly at first, like the first trickle of a river that will become a flood. Trappers and traders begin to move west, following the Missouri into the heart of the territory. They are rough men, often alone, carrying rifles and traps and a few pounds of salt. They paddle up the river in dugout canoes, or sometimes in the new steamboats that are just beginning to appear. The first steamboat on the Missouri, the Independence, chugs up from St. Louis in 1819, its engine coughing black smoke, its paddle wheel churning the muddy water. It is a strange sight, a machine moving against the current, and the Native Americans along the banks watch it with a mixture of wonder and suspicion. They have never seen anything like it. It seems to be alive, breathing and groaning, a creature of iron and fire. The fur trade booms. Beavers are trapped for their pelts, which are made into hats for gentlemen in Europe and America. The pelts are brought down the rivers to St. Louis, where they are sorted, baled, and shipped east. The trade routes become arteries, carrying goods and people and diseases into the deep interior. Smallpox comes with the traders, a terrible gift killing entire villages. The Native Americans have no immunity, and the disease spreads like wildfire through the plains. Whole nations are reduced to a fraction of their former size. The landscape changes. The buffalo herds shrink. The old ways become harder to hold on to. And yet, even as this happens, there are moments of peace, of quiet coexistence. A trader named Hugh Glass, after being mauled by a grizzly bear and left for dead by his companions, crawls for weeks across the prairie, eating roots and wild berries, drinking from muddy puddles. He is helped by the Arikara, who find him half dead and take him in. They nurse him back to health, and he stays with them for a time, learning their language, their ways. He does not forget the men who abandoned him, but he also does not forget the kindness of strangers. The story of his survival becomes a legend, told and retold around campfires for generations. The settlers come too. They are farmers mostly, looking for cheap land. They come from the east, from Kentucky and Tennessee and Virginia. They bring their families, their oxen, their plows. They build cabins of oak and walnut, roofed with sod or split shingles. They clear the land, planting corn and wheat and tobacco. They dig wells and plant orchards. They build churches and schools. The villages grow into towns, and the towns grow into cities. St. Louis becomes a bustling port, a gateway to the West. Kansas City begins as a trading post on the bluffs above the Missouri. Omaha is founded by speculators who see the potential of the river crossing. But the land is not empty. Every farm, every town, every road is carved out of territory that belongs to someone else. The government in Washington signs treaties, one after another, pushing the Native Americans onto smaller and smaller reservations. The treaties are often broken, the promises forgotten. The Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole. These nations are forced to move from their homelands in the southeast to the new Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. They walk the Trail of Tears, thousands of men, women, and children in winter without proper food or shelter. Many die along the way. Their graves mark the path from Georgia to the Arkansas River. And yet, even in the midst of all this sorrow, the land itself remains. The rivers keep flowing. The cottonwoods keep rustling in the wind. The prairies turn green in spring and gold in fall. The sun sets over the plains in a blaze of orange and pink, and the stars come out, one by one, just as they did 1,000 years ago. The buffalo, though diminished, still roam in scattered herds. The coyotes still howl at night. The air is still clean and cold in the winter, still heavy and sweet with the scent of wildflowers in the summer. It is easy, on a night like this, to imagine what it was like before the settlers came. To stand on a hilltop and see the grass waving like the sea, to hear the drumbeat of a distant powwow, to feel the ground tremble under the hooves of a stampeding herd. It is easy to imagine the silence, the deep, ancient silence of a land that has not yet been broken by the plow, that has not yet been crisscrossed by roads and fences. That silence is still there in places if you know where to look. It is in the canyons of the Badlands, where the wind moans through the spires of red and yellow rock. It is in the forests of the Ozarks, where the owls call to each other through the dark. It is in the marshes of the Atchafalaya, where the cypress trees stand like ghosts in the mist. And so we drift, listener. We drift through time as well as space. The years pass, the decades accumulate, and the Louisiana Territory is slowly divided into states and territories. Missouri becomes a state in 1/8 wound. Arkansas follows in 1/8 3/6. Iowa in 1/8 4/6. Kansas and Nebraska in 1854, though not without a bitter struggle over slavery. The land is surveyed, platted, auctioned. Towns are laid out in neat grids with courthouse squares and wide main streets. The railroads come, driving iron spikes into the prairie, connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific. The great herds of cattle are driven north from Texas to the railheads in Kansas, and the cowboy becomes a hero of dime novels and folk songs. But even as the land is tamed, it resists. The winters are brutal on the plains, with blizzards that can kill a man in minutes. The summers are scorching, with droughts that turn the soil to dust. The rivers flood, washing away crops and homes. The grasshoppers come in plagues, devouring everything green. The people who settle here learn to be tough, to be patient, to endure. They learn to respect the land and to fear it, and to love it in spite of everything. And through it all, the river flows. The Missouri, the mighty Missouri, carries the memory of all that has happened on its banks. It carries the canoes of the Mandan, the keelboats of the fur traders, the steamboats of the settlers, the barges of the modern age. It carries the silt of the mountains, the soil of the plains, the debris of 100 floods. It is a living thing, shifting and changing, cutting new channels and abandoning old ones. It does not care about the lines on a map, the boundaries of states, the claims of ownership. It simply flows from west to east, from the Rockies to the Gulf, a great brown serpent of water and mud and memory. On a quiet night, you can stand on the bluffs above the river and hear it whispering. It whispers the names of the people who have lived along its shores: the Osage, the Kansa, the Ponca, the Omaha, the Lakota. It whispers the names of the explorers, Lewis and Clark, Pike and Long, Fremont and others. It whispers the names of the ordinary people, the farmers and traders and soldiers, the women and children, the slaves and the free. Their voices are all mixed together, carried by the current, fading into the distance. And the Louisiana Purchase, that single transaction, that piece of paper signed in Paris in 1803, becomes something more than a deal. It becomes a story. It becomes a dream. It becomes a landscape that lives in the imagination, a place of wide-open spaces and endless possibilities, a place where a person can start over, can build a new life, can disappear into the horizon. It is a story of hope, and it is a story of sorrow. It is a story of courage, and it is a story of greed. It is all of these things tangled together like the roots of a great tree. But tonight, we do not need to untangle them. Tonight, we can simply let them be. We can let the story wash over us like the river, like the wind. We can close our eyes and see the prairie, the mountains, the forests, the rivers. We can feel the cool air, the warmth of the sun, the scent of the earth. We can hear the sounds, the chirp of a cricket, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf. We are here in this moment, in this story. And the night is deep and wide and full of peace. So let us drift a little further down the river, through the years, through the seasons. Let us watch the leaves turn gold and red in the fall, the snow fall silent and white in the winter, the grass green up in the spring, the heat shimmer in the summer. Let us watch the towns grow, the farms spread, the forests retreat. Let us watch the buffalo dwindle and the cattle multiply. Let us watch the people come and go, their lives as brief as the wildflowers that bloom on the prairie for a few weeks in May. And when we are tired, when our eyelids grow heavy, we can simply stop. We can lay our head down on the soft grass, under the wide Missouri sky, and listen to the river. It will still be flowing tomorrow, and the day after, and for 1,000 years to come. It will carry our dreams, our memories, our hopes, down to the great ocean where all rivers end. And we will be part of it, part of the story, part of the land. The Louisiana Purchase is not just a history lesson. It is a place we can still visit in our minds, in our sleep, in the quiet hours of the night. And it is waiting for us always with its vast silence and its endless horizon. And so we continue to drift, listener, down the river of time, through the decades that follow the purchase. The land is not just a place on a map now. It is a home for millions. But the path to that home is never straight. It bends and twists like the Missouri itself, through moments of joy and sorrow, of triumph and tragedy. In the years after Lewis and Clark returned, the fur trade boomed. The mountain men, trappers like Jedediah Smith, Jim Bridger, and Kit Carson, pushed deep into the Rockies following the beaver streams. They lived in the wild, learning from the Native Americans, trading with them, sometimes fighting them. They were a rough, lonely breed, these men. They wore buckskins and carried rifles, and they knew the land as well as any creature. They gathered each summer at the Rendezvous, a great fair in the mountains where they traded pelts for supplies, whiskey, and stories. Those gatherings were loud and rowdy, full of laughter and brawling and tall tales. But for the most part, the mountain men were silent, wandering through the vast spaces, their only companions the wind and the stars. As the beaver hats went out of fashion in Europe, the fur trade faded. But the knowledge these men had gained was invaluable. They became guides for the next wave of settlers, the ones who came not for fur but for land. The Oregon Trail began to carry wagons westward in the 1840s, and the Louisiana Purchase territory became the first great leg of that journey. The immigrants gathered at Independence, Missouri, or at Council Bluffs, Iowa. They loaded their wagons with flour and bacon, with tools and seeds, with Bibles and quilts. They said goodbye to family and friends, knowing they might never see them again. Then they set out across the prairie, a long line of white canvas moving slowly toward the horizon. The journey was hard. The days were long, the nights cold. The children grew tired and sick. The oxen stumbled and died. The rivers had to be crossed, and sometimes wagons overturned, drowning the horses and the people. The dust rose from the wheels and settled in the lungs. But still they came, year after year, thousands upon thousands of them. They passed by the Platte River, that shallow, muddy stream that seemed to go on forever. They climbed the Rocky Mountains, crossing South Pass, that gentle, grassy saddle that led to the Pacific side. They left behind the bones of their dead, marked by simple crosses or piles of stones. And they kept going, because the promise of land and a new life was too strong to resist. In 1848, gold was discovered in California and the rush was on. The Louisiana Purchase territory became a highway for the 49ers. They came from every corner of the country and from Europe and Asia too. They crossed the plains and the mountains, some walking, some riding, some pushing wheelbarrows loaded with their possessions. The trail was lined with abandoned wagons, with dead oxen, with graves. But the dream of gold drove them on, and in the process they mapped the land, they named the rivers, they built the first rough roads. The government in Washington watched all this with a mixture of pride and anxiety. The land was being settled, but it was also being contested. The Native Americans who had lived here for centuries were being pushed aside, sometimes by treaties, sometimes by force. The army built forts along the trails, at places like Fort Laramie in Wyoming and Fort Kearny in Nebraska. The soldiers were there to protect the immigrants, but they also fought the tribes who resisted the invasion. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, these were powerful, proud peoples who had dominated the plains for generations. They hunted the buffalo, they followed the herds, they lived in teepees made of buffalo hide. They knew no boundaries, no fences, no private property. The land was not something you could own. It was something you belonged to. But the settlers saw it differently. They saw empty land, land waiting to be claimed, land that could be fenced and plowed and turned into farms. The conflict was inevitable. And it was violent. There were massacres on both sides, terrible acts of cruelty and revenge. The Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, where a militia killed hundreds of Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly women and children. The Fetterman Fight in 1866, where the Lakota wiped out a company of soldiers. The Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, where Custer and his entire command were killed. The Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, where the 7th Cavalry killed hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children, ending the Indian Wars on the plains. These are not easy stories to tell, especially on a night meant for rest. But they are part of the land, part of the history of the Louisiana Purchase. And perhaps it is enough to acknowledge them, to let them be known, and then to let them fade like the echoes of a distant thunderstorm. The land itself does not forget, but it also does not hold a grudge. The grass grows over the graves. The rivers wash away the blood. The wind carries away the cries. And time, that great healer, that great eraser, moves on. After the Civil War, the pace of settlement quickened. The Homestead Act of 1862 offered 160 acres of public land to anyone who would live on it and farm it for 5 years. The railroad companies were given huge grants of land along their lines, and they sold it cheap to settlers. The advertisements went out across Europe. Free land in America, a new start, a better life. Germans, Scandinavians, Irish, Czechs, Poles, they came by the shipload. They came to New York, then traveled by train to the edge of the prairie. They staked their claims, built their sod houses, broke the tough grass with steel plows. They planted wheat and corn, oats and barley. They raised cattle and hogs and chickens. They built communities, churches, schools. They worked from dawn till dusk, year after year, with little rest. The prairie was not kind at first. The soil was rich, but the weather was extreme. The winters could kill you. The summers could parch you. The grasshoppers could strip a field in a single afternoon. The fires could sweep across the plains, burning everything in their path. And the loneliness, the sheer, vast emptiness of the land could drive a person mad. Some gave up and went back east. Some stayed and found a way to thrive. And some, like the characters in the novels of Willa Cather, found a kind of beauty in the struggle, a quiet dignity in the endurance. The railroads were the arteries of the new territory. They brought supplies and people in. They carried grain and cattle out. Towns sprang up along the tracks, every 10 or 20 miles, a depot, a grain elevator, a general store, a saloon. The towns were named after railroad officials or local heroes or simply the nearest river or creek. They were rough places, often violent, with gunfights and brawls and vigilante justice. But they were also places of hope, where a man could start over, where a woman could open a boarding house, where a child could go to school for the first time. The cattle drives became legendary. After the Civil War, Texas had millions of longhorn cattle but no market. The railroads had reached Kansas to towns like Abilene, Dodge City, and Wichita. So the cowboys drove the herds north across the Red River, through Indian Territory, across the open plains. The drives took months. The men rode in the dust and heat, slept under the stars, fought off stampedes and rustlers. They were young, often barely teenagers, and they lived hard and died young. But they became symbols of freedom, of the wild, open West, of a way of life that was already disappearing even as they lived it. By the 1880s, the open range was closing. The barbed wire fences went up, dividing the prairie into squares. The buffalo were nearly gone, hunted to the edge of extinction. The Indian reservations were established, confining the tribes to small, often barren tracts of land. The cattle ranches became huge operations, but they were fenced and managed. The cowboys became hired hands, not free riders. The West was being tamed, and yet there was still room for wonder. The land was still vast, still beautiful, still full of surprises. The Badlands of South Dakota, with their strange, eroded shapes and colors, looked like a different planet. The Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota, rose like a dark island in the sea of grass. The high plains of Nebraska, the sandhills with their rolling dunes and clear streams, were home to the sandhill cranes that migrated through each spring, their calls like ancient music. The Ozarks of Missouri and Arkansas, with their deep forests and limestone springs, offered a different kind of wildness, more intimate, more secret. And the river, always the river. The Missouri continued to carry commerce and people. Steamboats grew larger and more luxurious, but they also became more dangerous. The river was unpredictable, full of snags and sandbars. Many boats sank. The steamboat era peaked in the 1850s, then declined as the railroads took over. But the river remained a living artery, a thread connecting the past to the present. In the early 20th century, the federal government began to intervene in a big way. The Reclamation Act of 1902 funded irrigation projects, turning dry land into farmland. Dams were built on the Missouri and its tributaries, creating reservoirs, controlling floods, generating electricity. The Pick-Sloan Plan after World War II transformed the Missouri River into a series of lakes and channels, a managed waterway. The Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara villages that Lewis and Clark had visited were flooded by the Garrison Dam. The people were moved to new towns, but they lost their ancient homes, their burial grounds, their connection to the river's banks. The Dust Bowl of the 193s was another chapter of struggle. Years of drought and poor farming practices turned the topsoil into dust. The wind blew it into huge black clouds that darkened the sky. The farmers packed up their families and left, heading west to California, a new exodus. John Steinbeck wrote about them in The Grapes of Wrath. The photographs of Dorothea Lange showed their faces, lined with worry and hope. It was a hard time, a bitter time, but the land once again recovered. New farming methods, better irrigation, and the return of rain brought the plains back to life. Today, the Louisiana Purchase territory is a patchwork of states, each with its own character. Missouri is the gateway with its rolling hills and limestone caves, its jazz and barbecue. Kansas is the heart of the plains, with its wheat fields and sunflowers, its endless skies. Nebraska is the Cornhusker state, with its college football and its quiet, friendly towns. Iowa is the land of corn and pigs, of county fairs and covered bridges. Oklahoma is the Sooner State, with its oil wells and its Native American heritage, its wind and its wide horizons. The Dakotas are the Badlands and the buffalo, the Black Hills and the prairie dogs. Arkansas is the Ozarks, the hot springs, the diamond mines. And Louisiana itself, the southern part of the original Purchase, is the bayous and the jazz, the Creole and the Cajun, the Mississippi River Delta, the land of Mardi Gras and gumbo. But the land itself is still there, underneath all the human activity. The geology is ancient, older than any nation. The Mississippi River has been flowing for millions of years, carving its path through the continent. The Great Plains were once an inland sea, and the fossils of sea creatures can still be found in the rocks. The Black Hills are a dome of granite, uplifted and eroded, full of gold and secrets. The land remembers even when we forget. On a night like this, when the world is quiet and the mind is at rest, we can feel that memory. We can sense the deep time of the earth, the slow movements of tectonic plates, the rise and fall of ice ages, the shifting of rivers and coastlines. We can feel the presence of the people who came before us, the ones who lived here for thousands of years before the Purchase, and the ones who came after, struggling and building and dreaming. They are all here in the soil, in the water, in the air. And we are here too, listener. We are part of this story, whether we live in the territory or far away. We carry it in our minds, in our imaginations. The Louisiana Purchase is not just a historical event. It is a place we can visit in our dreams, in our quiet moments. It is a landscape that exists in the mind, as real as any map. So let your eyelids grow heavy. Let your breathing slow. Let the images drift like clouds across the sky of your thoughts. Picture the wide Missouri, brown and slow, reflecting the sunset. Picture the grasslands waving in the wind like a golden sea. Picture the mountains purple in the distance, their peaks touched with snow. Picture the buffalo, their dark shapes moving across the prairie. Picture the stars, countless as the grains of sand, shining down on the land. You are safe here. You are warm. The night is long and kind, and the story will continue as it always does in the quiet spaces between one breath and the next. Perhaps you will dream of the river. Perhaps you will walk along its banks under the cottonwoods, listening to the murmur of the water. Perhaps you will see the faces of the people who lived here, not as ghosts, but as memories, as whispers in the wind. They are not demanding anything from you. They are simply there, part of the landscape, part of the long, slow, beautiful unfolding of time. And so we go on, drifting, floating like a leaf on the current. The years pass. The seasons turn. The stars wheel overhead. The land endures. And the story of the Louisiana Purchase becomes not a lesson but a lullaby, a gentle melody that carries us into sleep. Listener, rest now. The history is done for tonight. The land is quiet. The river is low. The wind has stilled. There is nothing left to do but close your eyes and let the darkness hold you. Good night. And yet, even as we say good night, the story of the Louisiana Purchase does not truly end. It continues to echo in the land and in the lives of those who live there, in the quiet rhythms of everyday life, in the way the light falls across the prairie at dusk, in the sound of a train whistle far off in the night. The purchase was not a single event, but a beginning, a seed that grew into a vast and complicated tree, its branches reaching across centuries and across the continent. And on a night like this, when the mind is soft and the body is still, we can let our thoughts wander along those branches, following them into the deeper, quieter corners of history. There is a place in the heart of the Louisiana Purchase territory that few people visit, a place called the Flint Hills of Kansas. It is one of the last remaining tallgrass prairies in North America, a stretch of rolling land that has never been plowed, never been broken by the plow. The soil is too rocky, too thin for farming, so the grass has grown here for thousands of years, undisturbed. The big bluestem rises higher than a man's head in summer, and the wind moves through it like a wave through the sea. In the spring, the wildflowers bloom, the pink of the prairie coneflower, the yellow of the compass plant, the purple of the lead plant, each one a small miracle of color against the green. In the autumn, the grass turns a deep, rusty gold, and the sky becomes a dome of blue so clear it seems to go on forever. And in the winter, the prairie is quiet, almost silent. The grass is dry and brown, bending under the weight of snow. The wind blows cold and steady, and the only sound is the rustle of the blades, a sound like a distant whisper. It is a landscape of patience, of endurance. The Flint Hills have seen the passage of the buffalo, the passage of the Native American hunters, the passage of the cattle drives, the passage of the railroad, the passage of the automobile. They have seen the Dust Bowl, the droughts, the floods, the fires. And still the grass grows back. Still the wind blows. Still the land remains. If you drive through the Flint Hills at night, on a road that curves and dips through the low, rolling hills, you might see the lights of a small town in the distance, a cluster of dots on the dark horizon. The towns are few and far between: Cottonwood Falls, Strong City, Cassidy. They are quiet places with old limestone buildings, a courthouse with a clock tower, a grain elevator, a diner where the coffee is always on and the pie is made from scratch. The people there live close to the land, farming and ranching, raising children, going to church on Sunday. They know the weather, the seasons, the way the river rises and falls. They know the history, too, the stories of the Osage and the Kansa who lived here before the white settlers came, the stories of the cattle drives and the homesteaders, the stories of the boom and bust that shaped the towns. One such town is Council Grove in Kansas, a place where the history of the Louisiana Purchase comes into sharp focus. Council Grove was a key stop on the Santa Fe Trail, the route that connected Missouri to the Spanish settlements in the Southwest. The trail began in Franklin, Missouri, on the Missouri River, and stretched 800 miles across the plains, across the Arkansas River, across the dry and dusty land to Santa Fe. The traders who traveled that trail were brave men, or perhaps foolish men, depending on how you looked at it. They drove wagons loaded with goods, cloth, tools, firearms, whiskey, and they faced everything the land could throw at them. Drought, blizzards, floods, attacks by Native Americans, the constant threat of death from disease or accident. But the trade was profitable, and the trail grew busy, and Council Grove became a crucial way station, a place to rest and repair and resupply before the long journey west. In Council Grove, there is an old oak tree called the Council Oak, under which the Osage and the United States government signed a treaty in 1825, allowing the Santa Fe Trail to pass through their lands. The treaty was a fragile, uneasy agreement, one that would be broken and renegotiated many times in the years that followed. But the tree still stands, its thick branches spreading wide, its trunk covered in moss and lichen. It is a living monument, a witness to the long, slow, often painful history of the land. And on a quiet evening, when the light is golden and the air is still, you can walk under its branches and imagine the voices of the people who gathered there. The Osage chiefs in their blankets and beads, the American officials in their frock coats and top hats, the traders in their buckskin and wool. They spoke of boundaries and rights, of peace and profit, of the future of a land that no one truly owned, but that everyone wanted to claim. The Santa Fe Trail is gone now, for the most part. The ruts are still visible in places, faint lines in the grass like scars on the earth. The towns that served it have faded, some to ghost towns, others to sleepy hamlets. But the road that runs through Council Grove today follows roughly the same path, and if you drive that road at dusk, you might feel a sense of connection to the past, a sense that the trail is still there, just beneath the asphalt, waiting for the next traveler to come along. Further north in the Dakota prairies, there is another kind of stillness, a stillness that feels older, more ancient. The land there is flat and wide, so wide that the horizon seems to curve and the sky is enormous, full of light and cloud. The wind never stops and the grass is short and tough, a mixture of buffalo grass and blue grama, the kind of grass that can survive drought and fire and grazing. It is a land of extremes, of heat and cold, of drought and flood, of sudden storms that drop hail the size of golf balls, and tornadoes that carve dark scars across the plains. And yet it is a beautiful land in its own stark way. The sunsets are extraordinary, the sky turning pink and orange and purple, the clouds catching fire, the long shadows of the grain elevators stretching across the fields. The nights are dark, truly dark, free from the glow of city lights. On a clear night, the Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light, so bright and dense that you can see the individual stars, thousands and thousands of them, a sea of diamonds. The air is dry and cold, and the only sound is the wind, or the distant howl of a coyote, or the low hum of a wind turbine spinning in the dark. Wind turbines are a new feature on the prairie, a sign of the times. They stand tall and white, their blades turning slowly, catching the wind that never stops. They are a modern answer to the old problem of how to survive on the plains, how to make a living from a land that offers little in the way of water or soil, but gives its wind freely. And in a way, they are a continuation of the story of the Louisiana Purchase, a story of adaptation and innovation, of people trying to find a way to live in a land that is both generous and unforgiving. The wind turbines are not the only change. The prairie is also dotted with oil wells, their pump jacks dipping and rising like mechanical birds, pulling oil from deep underground. The oil boom in the Dakotas has brought wealth and trouble, new jobs and new strains, a population surge and a housing crisis. It has also brought a kind of reckoning, a reminder that the land is not just a source of beauty and inspiration, but a resource to be extracted and consumed. The history of the Louisiana Purchase is, after all, a history of extraction, of timber and fur, of gold and oil, of grass and water. The land gives and the people take, and the cycle continues, generation after generation. And the Native American tribes are still here, still present, still connected to the land. The Osage, the Kansa, the Pawnee, the Lakota, the Arikara, the Mandan, the Hidatsa, the Comanche, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole. Their names are woven into the landscape, into the rivers and the mountains and the towns. They have endured through removal and assimilation, through poverty and discrimination, through the loss of their lands and their languages. But they have also endured, and they continue to practice their traditions, to teach their children, to honor their ancestors. Their powwows are still held, their dances still performed, their stories still told. The drum beats echo across the plains, a heartbeat that has never stopped. In Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation has built a museum, a cultural center, a college. They have preserved their language, their scripts, their stories. The Trail of Tears is a wound that has not healed, but the Cherokee have not let it define them entirely. They have built businesses, schools, hospitals. They have created a society that is both modern and ancient, a bridge between the past and the future. And on a quiet night, when you walk through the Cherokee National Capitol building in Tahlequah, a red brick structure built in 1869, you can feel the weight of that history, the determination of a people who refuse to disappear. In South Dakota, the Lakota hold the Wounded Knee Memorial, a place of mourning and remembrance. The massacre there in 1890 was a terrible, bloody end to the Indian Wars, a tragic event that still resonates in the hearts of the Lakota people. But they also hold the powwows, the sun dances, the ceremonies that celebrate their survival. They keep the sacred pipe, the wisdom of the elders, the knowledge of the buffalo. And they teach their children that the land is not a possession, but a relation, a mother, a source of life. The buffalo, too, are making a comeback. Once nearly extinct, they are being reintroduced on reservations and in national parks, in small herds that graze the prairie, their dark shapes moving slowly across the grass. They are a symbol of resilience, of recovery, of the possibility of healing. To see a buffalo herd at sunset, their breath misting in the cold air, their hooves pressing into the earth, is to feel a connection to the old world, the world before the Louisiana Purchase, before the horses and the guns and the settlers. The buffalo have been here for thousands of years, and they are still here, a living link to the deep past. And the river, the Missouri, still flows. It has been tamed and channeled and dammed, but it still carries water from the Rocky Mountains to the Mississippi, a slow, steady, powerful current. It is still a place of life, of migration, of commerce. The barges still move along it, carrying grain and coal and chemicals. The fish still swim in it, the catfish and the walleye and the paddlefish. The birds still use it as a highway, the sandhill cranes and the geese and the ducks, their calls echoing across the river at dawn and dusk. On a night like this, you could sit on the banks of the Missouri, somewhere in Nebraska or Missouri, and watch the river slide by, dark and silent, reflecting the stars. You could imagine Lewis and Clark passing this spot, their keelboat moving against the current, their men pulling on the oars, their voices carrying across the water. You could imagine the Mandan villages on the bluffs above, the smoke from the lodges rising into the evening sky. You could imagine the buffalo, the elk, the deer, the beaver, the otter, the abundance of life that filled this valley. And you could feel the weight of time, the layers of history, the way the river has seen it all and remembers nothing, just keeps flowing, patient and eternal. The story of the Louisiana Purchase is, in the end, a story of transformation. A single piece of paper signed in Paris in 1803 changed the face of a continent. It opened the door to the westward expansion, the displacement of native peoples, the rise of slavery, the growth of a nation. It brought incredible wealth and terrible suffering, great achievement and deep loss. It created a landscape of farms and cities and highways, of dams and fences and oil wells. But it also preserved a wilderness, a wildness, a sense of possibility that still lingers in the air, in the wind, in the silence of the plains. Listener, as you lie there, warm and comfortable, your breathing slow and even, let your mind wander across that landscape. Let it drift from the bayous of Louisiana to the high plains of Montana, from the Ozarks to the Badlands, from the cotton fields of Arkansas to the wheat fields of Kansas. Each place has its own light, its own sound, its own memory. And each place is connected to the others by the rivers, by the railways, by the roads, by the stories that flow through them. The stories are not all happy. They are not all easy. They are full of conflict and contradiction, of hope and despair. But they are true and they are deep and they are part of the fabric of this land. And on a night like this, when the mind is quiet and the heart is open, we can hold them gently, without judgment, without demand. We can simply let them be, like the stars in the sky, like the grass on the prairie, like the water in the river. And so we continue drifting, floating like a leaf on the current. The years pass. The seasons turn. The stars wheel overhead. The land endures. And the story of the Louisiana Purchase becomes not a lesson but a lullaby, a gentle melody that carries us deeper into the night. There is a place in the corner of the Purchase that is often forgotten, a small piece of land that was not part of the original deal but that became part of the territory through a later adjustment. It is the northeastern corner of Oklahoma, a region called the Ozark Plateau, where the land rises into low, forested hills with clear streams and deep caves. It is a place of quiet beauty, of hidden springs and secluded valleys. The people there are farmers and ranchers, hunters and fishermen, and they live at a slower pace, a pace that matches the turning of the seasons. They know the names of the birds and the trees, the ways of the deer and the turkey. They know the weather, the sky, the soil. They live in a landscape that is intimate, secret, personal. In the summer, the Ozarks are green and lush, the leaves thick and the air heavy with humidity. The cicadas sing in the trees, a steady, pulsing drone that seems to vibrate in the bones. The creeks run clear and cool, and the limestone bluffs are covered in moss and ferns. In the autumn, the hills explode in color, the reds and oranges and yellows of the hickory and oak and maple. In the winter, the land is bare and cold, the branches skeletal, the sky gray. In the spring, the dogwoods bloom, white and pink, and the redbuds turn the woods into a haze of purple. It is a land of stories, too. The Ozarks are full of tales of ghosts and treasure, of outlaws and hermits. There is a cave called the Lost Cave, where a band of Confederate soldiers supposedly hid their gold, and no one has ever found it. There is a spring called the Healing Spring, where the water is said to cure whatever ails you. There is a mountain called the Devil's Knob, where strange lights appear on certain nights. The stories are told around campfires, in living rooms, on front porches, and they are passed down from generation to generation, as real as any history book. And all of these places, all of these stories, are part of the legacy of the Louisiana Purchase. They are the human response to the land, the way we make sense of it, the way we shape it and are shaped by it. The Purchase gave us the space to dream, to build, to fail, to try again. It gave us a stage for the drama of American life, a stage that is still being set, still being played out even now in the quiet moments of the night. Listener, your eyelids are heavy now. Your breath is deep and slow. The room is dark and warm. The sounds of the night, the creak of the house, the hum of the furnace, the distant bark of a dog are fading into a soft background, a lullaby of the everyday. Your mind is drifting, floating, gently falling into the soft, dark space of sleep. Let the last image be this: a single oak tree standing on a hilltop in the Flint Hills, its branches reaching out against a sky full of stars. The wind moves through the grass and the grass bends and waves. The tree has been there for 100 years, maybe 200 years. It has seen the buffalo, the cattle, the plows, the fences, the roads. It has seen the dawn and the dusk, the rain and the snow, the heat and the cold. It has seen the people come and go, and it stands still, patient, rooted in the earth. You are that tree for a moment. You are rooted in the quiet of the night, in the deep time of the land. You are part of the story, part of the long, slow, beautiful unfolding of time. And there is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to worry about. You are simply here resting in the heart of the Louisiana Purchase. Good night, listener. Sleep well. And may your dreams be as wide as the prairie, as deep as the river, as peaceful as the night sky. But the night is long, and the journey of the mind need not end just because the body is still. There are still stories to tell, stories that whisper through the leaves of the live oaks and ripple on the dark water of the bayous. So let us linger here, just a little longer, in the soft space between wakefulness and sleep. Imagine the Mississippi Delta at the turn of the 19th century, before the levees and the drainage canals, before the cotton fields stretched to the horizon. The river here was a braided, shifting thing, spreading out into countless channels and backwaters, creating a vast network of swamps and marshes and islands. The water was dark with silt and tannin, the color of strong tea. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of decaying vegetation, a rich, earthy scent that clung to everything. The mosquitoes hummed in clouds and the alligators lay motionless in the shallows, their eyes like cold jewels above the waterline. On a summer night, the delta was alive with sound. The croaking of frogs, the buzzing of insects, the splash of a fish, the distant bellow of a bull gator. The stars overhead were veiled by a haze of moisture, their light diffused into a soft, milky glow. The moon, when it rose, cast a silver sheen on the water, and the cypress trees stood like ghosts, their trunks flared at the base, their knees rising from the swamp like the hands of drowned giants. It was a world apart, a place where time moved differently. The people who lived there, the Choctaw and the Chickasaw, the French and the Spanish, the African slaves and the free people of color, had learned to move with the rhythms of the water. They traveled in pirogues, shallow boats carved from a single log, slipping through the narrow channels, fishing and trapping and gathering. They built their homes on high ground, on natural levees and shell middens, and they knew the signs of the changing seasons, the rising of the river, the spawning of the fish, the migration of the birds. When the Louisiana Purchase was signed, this delta became part of the United States. But the change did not happen overnight. The river still flowed, the alligators still ruled the swamps, the people still lived as they had for generations. The new government in Washington was far away, and the first American officials who arrived found themselves in a world they barely understood. They spoke a language of laws and boundaries, of surveys and deeds, but the Delta spoke a different language, a language of water and mud and living things. One of those early officials was a man named William C. Claiborne, the first American governor of the Louisiana Territory. He arrived in New Orleans in 1803, a young man with a serious face and a sense of purpose. He found a city that was not like any American city he had known. New Orleans was a place of French and Spanish architecture, of narrow streets and hidden courtyards, of cafes and ballrooms and markets. The people spoke French or Spanish or a Creole patois that mixed African and European words. They danced on Sundays, they gambled, they had a relaxed attitude toward life that unsettled the Protestant sensibilities of the new rulers. Claiborne tried to impose order. He issued proclamations, established courts, organized a militia. But the city resisted in its own quiet way. The merchants continued their trade with the Caribbean and the Gulf. The free women of color continued their social events, dressed in silks and jewels. The operas continued, the theater continued, the festivals continued. New Orleans was not going to be remade overnight, and Claiborne learned to adapt, to listen, to compromise. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, that Claiborne once attended a ball in the city and found himself surrounded by ladies in elaborate gowns, all speaking French. He could not understand a word they said, and they could not understand him. But they smiled, and he smiled, and they danced together in the candlelight. The governor of the new territory and the Creole women of the old world. It was a moment of grace, a moment when the awkwardness of conquest gave way to the simple pleasure of human connection. And that, in a way, is the story of the Louisiana Purchase. It was not just a transaction of land, but a meeting of cultures, a collision of worlds. The French, the Spanish, the native tribes, the African slaves, the American settlers, all of them were thrown together in a vast, unplanned experiment. They brought their languages, their foods, their music, their religions. They brought their hopes and their fears. And from that mixing, something new emerged. A culture, a cuisine, a way of life that was neither fully European nor fully African nor fully native, but something else, something that could only have grown in the soil of Louisiana. Listener, as you lie there, perhaps you can taste that mixture. The gumbo, the jambalaya, the crawfish etouffee, these dishes were born in the kitchens of New Orleans and the bayous, where French roux met African okra, where Spanish rice met Choctaw filet. Each ingredient tells a story of migration and adaptation, of hunger and invention. And when you eat those dishes, you are tasting history, tasting the deep, slow simmer of time. But the Delta is not the only place where the Purchase left its mark. Let us drift north, across the piney woods of Mississippi, across the Black Belt of Alabama into the rolling hills of Tennessee. Here the land changes. The swamps give way to forests, the forests to fields. The rivers are clearer, the air is drier. The people who settled here in the decades after the Purchase were mostly from the back country of Virginia and the Carolinas. They were farmers, hunters, traders, people who valued independence and self-reliance. They brought with them the English language, the Protestant faith, and a deep suspicion of authority. They also brought slavery. The cotton boom that began in the early 19th century transformed the southern parts of the Louisiana Purchase into an empire of cotton, built on the labor of enslaved Africans. The land was fertile, the climate was warm, and the demand for cotton in the mills of England and New England seemed insatiable. Planters bought up huge tracts of land, cleared the forests, and planted rows of cotton that stretched to the horizon. They bought slaves and more slaves, and the population of enslaved people in the United States grew from about 1 million in 1800 to nearly 4 million by 1860. This is a heavy history, listener, and we do not need to dwell on it in a way that disturbs your rest. But it is part of the land, part of the story, and we acknowledge it with a quiet gravity. The fields of cotton and tobacco and rice that grew in the Purchase territory were watered with tears and sweat. The great houses that still stand along the Mississippi with their white columns and wide verandas were built on a foundation of violence and injustice. And the descendants of those who were enslaved still live in the same towns, the same parishes, the same counties, carrying the weight of that history, even as they build new lives, new families, new hopes. On a night like tonight, you might drive through the Arkansas Delta, past the abandoned plantation houses, past the small churches with their tin roofs, past the fields that are now fallow or planted in soybeans. The land is quiet, the air is still, the stars are bright. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the voices of the past, the songs of the field hands, the sermons of the preachers, the laughter of children playing in the yards. Those voices are not gone. They are in the soil, in the water, in the wind. They are part of the purchase too. And so we return to the river, the great Mississippi, the spine of the purchase. The river is the thread that ties all these stories together. It is the highway that carried the flatboats and the steamboats, that carried the cotton and the corn, that carried the slaves and the settlers, that carried the dreams and the nightmares. The river is still there, wide and brown and slow, cutting through the heart of the continent. In the quiet of the night, you can picture yourself standing on the bluffs above the river, somewhere near Natchez, perhaps. The water is dark, almost black, reflecting the moon. The trees on the opposite bank are a jagged silhouette. A tugboat passes, its lights twinkling, its engine a low hum that fades into the distance. The river moves on, patient and eternal, carrying the silt of 1,000 miles, carrying the stories of 1,000 years. Listener, your breath is steady now. Your mind is calm. The weight of the day has lifted and you are floating like a leaf on the current. The Louisiana Purchase is not just a historical event, not just a piece of paper or a line on a map. It is a place, a landscape, a feeling. It is the smell of the pine woods, the sound of the cicadas, the taste of the river water. It is the memory of the buffalo and the dream of the railroad. It is the light of the prairie sunset and the dark of the swamp at midnight. And it is yours in this moment to wander through without effort, without direction, without purpose. You can walk through the canebrakes of Missouri, where the stalks rise 20 feet high, and the air is thick with the scent of dust and leaves. You can sit on the banks of the Platte, where the sandhill cranes gather by the thousands in the spring, their calls like the voices of ancient gods. You can stand on the summit of the Ozarks, looking out over the endless green billows of trees. You can float down the Arkansas River, past the Sandoval Rock, past the marshes, past the silent fishermen in their boats. The night is deep and still. The stars are turning overhead. And the land is resting as you are resting in the vast, slow, peaceful grip of time. There is a tale, perhaps apocryphal, about a man who lived on the edge of the Purchase, somewhere in what is now Kansas in the years after the deal. He was a French trapper, one of the last of his kind who had come down from Canada following the waterways. He had a cabin on a small creek, a few traps, a pack of dogs, and a woman from the Osage tribe who shared his life. He knew the land in a way that few white men did. He knew where the beaver built their dams, where the deer bedded down, where the best flint could be found. He knew the names of the stars in the Osage language, and he knew the names of the winds. When the Americans began to arrive, with their surveys and their plows and their fences, he felt the change like a chill in the air. He watched the buffalo disappear, the grass turn to wheat, the rivers grow muddy with runoff. He felt the old way of life slipping away, like water through his fingers. And one day he simply left. He packed his traps, his few possessions, his wife and his dogs, and he moved west into the unknown, into the land that would become the Oklahoma Panhandle, the Texas Panhandle, the great emptiness of the high plains. He was never heard from again. But sometimes on a night like this, when the wind is blowing from the west, you can almost imagine him out there, still walking, still hunting, still living in the old way. He is a ghost, a memory, a symbol of all the people who were displaced by the Purchase, all the lives that were uprooted and scattered like seeds in the wind. But the land remembers, the grass remembers, the river remembers, and in the quiet of the night when we are soft and open and still, we can remember too. We can honor those who came before, both the victors and the vanquished, the builders and the wanderers. We can hold them in our hearts not as lessons to be learned, but as companions on this long, slow journey through the dark. Listener, the hour is late. The world is sleeping. Your pillow is cool, your blanket is warm. The last weight of consciousness is slipping away like a canoe drifting from the shore. Let it go. Let yourself float into the deep, quiet waters of sleep. The Louisiana Purchase is done. The river is still. The stars are out. Good night and sleep well, and may the peace of the prairie be with you. And yet, even as we drift toward rest, there is one more story that the land holds, a quieter story, a softer one that might ease you further into the arms of sleep. It is the story of the night itself over the Louisiana Purchase, of how the vastness of the sky changes as you move across that immense territory. On the eastern edge, near the Mississippi, the sky is often hazy, humid, full of the soft glow of river mist and distant city lights. But as you travel west into the heart of the Purchase, the air clears. The stars come out like diamonds scattered on black velvet. The Milky Way becomes a river of light, so bright and thick that you can almost hear it, a faint cosmic hum if you listen with your whole being. On the plains of Kansas, in the tallgrass prairies that once stretched from horizon to horizon, the night sky is a dome of pure wonder. The wind never stops there. It whispers through the grass, bending the stems in long waves like the breathing of the earth itself. And if you lie down in that grass on a night like this, you can feel the immense solitude of the place. You are a tiny speck, surrounded by the endless land and the endless sky. The buffalo are gone. The tribes are scattered, the homesteads are few and far between. But the land is still alive, still breathing, still holding the memory of all that came before. There is a particular spot in the Nebraska Sandhills, a region of rolling dunes covered in prairie grass, where the silence is so deep that you can hear your own heartbeat. The Sandhills are a strange and beautiful part of the Purchase, a remnant of ancient glaciers and wind-blown sand, now stabilized by grass roots. The water table is close to the surface here, so the valleys are dotted with small lakes and wetlands, home to sandhill cranes and ducks and herons. On a clear night, the reflection of the stars in those still waters is like a second sky, a mirror world of light and shadow. Imagine, listener, that you are standing at the edge of one of those lakes. The water is black, but the stars are so bright that you can see their reflections trembling on the surface. A frog calls, a low, rhythmic croak. Another answers from across the water. The sound is ancient, a song that has been sung for millions of years. You breathe in the cool night air, smelling damp earth and grass and the faint sweetness of wild flowers. Your feet are planted on the ground, but your mind is floating, drifting, untethered. This is the gift of the Louisiana Purchase in the end. Not the land itself, not the resources, not the history, but the space. The room to breathe, the room to dream, the room to be alone with the stars and the wind and the slow turning of the earth. The Purchase gave Americans a frontier, a place to go when the old places grew too crowded, too noisy, too complicated. It gave them a chance to start over, to reinvent themselves, to live in a way that felt freer, even if that freedom was often an illusion. And tonight, as you rest in your bed, you can borrow that space. You can close your eyes and let the prairie open up inside you. Let the horizon stretch. Let the sky grow wide. Let the wind blow through your mind, carrying away the clutter of the day. There is no rush. There is no destination. You are simply here in this moment, in this vast and gentle darkness. The French, who sold the land for pennies an acre, perhaps did not fully understand what they were letting go. They saw a wilderness, a distant territory that was hard to govern and harder to defend. But the Americans saw something else, a promise, a blank page, a chance to write their own story. And they did write that story with all its triumphs and tragedies, its beauty and its sorrow. The story is still being written in the fields of Iowa, the oil fields of Texas, the suburbs of St. Louis, the mountains of Montana. Every day, a new chapter, a new line, a new word. But tonight, the story is quiet. The ink is dry. The pages are still. And you, dear listener, are falling into the soft, warm space between the lines. Let the names of the places wash over you. Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas. They are not just states. They are landscapes, memories, dreams. They are the shape of the continent, the curve of the river, the line of the horizon. Now let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts grow soft and indistinct like a distant train whistle fading into the night. The Louisiana Purchase is done. The story is told. The river flows on, and you, listener, are at peace. Good night again, and may the quiet of the plains carry you into deep, untroubled sleep.